Welcome, aloha. Thank you for joining us. ThinkTech Hawaii, time for responsible change. It's been time for responsible change for a long time. So today, we're talking about the loss of trust in government. What do we do about it? How do we get through? And we have with us today a wonderful panel with Professor Ben Davis, Professor Emeritus from University of Toledo School of Law and now visiting prof at Washington and Lee School of Law, retired Hawaii Judge Sandra Simms, and author and recent ABA Session of Dispute Resolution past chair David Larson, and also professor at Mitchell Hamlin School of Law in St. Paul. We'll get right to our program in just a sec. Okay, so Ben, Sandra, David, in the Eisenhower-Kennedy years and even the very beginning of the Lyndon Johnson years, public trust in government was measured at up around 75%. Since the later part of the first George Bush's, the senior Bush's presidency, and continuing now, it's been down around 25%. And there are breakdowns between different groups and different demographics. But what does that mean? What does this tell us? Ben, you want to start us off?
Sure. I have a couple different theories for what it's worth. One is that unionization was stronger back then, and the share of income in the country was higher, at least for whites, than it was today. Okay. Then around mid-70s or so, you had the decrease in unionization that happened, and you started to see that the benefits of productivity were not being shared with the workers as much. It was going up to the top folks. So a consequence of all of that is that you started to have people who could have a decent living on one salary had to now go to having two salaries, two workers in the family, to keep that same level that they'd had when they were kids back in the 50s. And then you had an acceleration, obviously, with the oil shock and all that. But you had this effort at reducing unionization, which also led to people negotiating against their bosses at a disadvantage. And then came along the Reagan thing. And Reagan's basically argument was that your problem is the government, and get the government off your back, and we're going to get everybody good if we do tax decreases, right? And I think there were a lot of people who bought into the idea that the Democrats got them to the middle class, and they thought the Republicans would keep them in the middle class with those tax cuts. And then what happened is that you had the breakdown of PATCO, the air traffic controllers thing. There are all these different efforts that came along that killed unions, and that accelerated the decrease in unions. And also with the tax cuts, you had revenue going up or income going up to the top 10%, now maybe 1% and all that. And people were still struggling, now working two jobs on one side, maybe three jobs on the other to try to keep that life going. And you feel like you're on like a hamster on a wheel, right?
Yeah.
And everybody's telling you the problem is, at least on the Republican side, they're saying to you, problem is the government. And you're not supposed, but now we get to a point where we got these oligarchs, we'll call them that, who are billionaires and very rich, who are basically wagging the tail of the Republicans in terms of extremist policies that they want, because they want chaos, because they don't want anybody to look at the way the money's going, right?
Yeah.
And so, that's where we're at today. And so after 40 odd years of telling people that the government is your problem, when you realize the government is not your problem, that your problem is that you're not making enough money, and that's what's making it hard for you, and your kids are going into debt to just go to college, when back in the day, they could go to college for basically nothing, because the government subsidized college and all that, so people feel like they're running on a treadmill, and they are, and they are getting screwed. But it isn't the government that's doing it.
Yeah. Well, I think that you've summed it up. I guess we can go now, huh?
That's my take on it.
I think you've said it all, but I was just gonna. there's when you go back to the Kennedy years, there's also this incredible, for some of the reasons that you've stated, Ben. This loss of idealism and this notion that things are going to get better for us. Whether it's minorities, for Blacks, for women, all those forces were in place as well, thinking this is the golden time. This is gonna be it. And so you had all this ideology. You had things like stuff like the Peace Corps. I actually considered joining the Peace Corps, and things like that, where people actually thought we can really make a difference in the world. Civil rights movement was certainly a big part of that. We can really change stuff. And now I don't know that there's that much, that kind of, the things you pointed out, Ben, are extraordinarily, and those are most important. Where we are now, I don't know. I still keep my optimism. You guys accuse me of being terribly optimistic. I am. I have to be. And I suspect that we may be on the verge of having a new youth kind of movement taking over and addressing even the very things that you talked about. And that movement is not just in this country, it is worldwide. At least I see it that way. In terms of looking at what, as you say, the billionaire class, the oligarchs are international. They're not just in this country, they're all over. They're making those kinds of forces are in place in other countries as well. And not being very well tolerated by an upcoming generation either. So there is that. And there's my optimism.
David, your thoughts?
Yeah, picking up on something Ben said about the decrease in unionization. After World War II, unionization came to over 40% of the private workforce. Now we're about 6%. When we were about 40%, unions do a lot of things. And one thing is that they democratize the workplace. And that collective action gives people a voice that actually demands to be heard. So people believe that their voices were being heard. And
that is true.
And in fact, they were, because they had power to affect the national economy. So when we had strong unions, there was a avenue for people to pursue to get their priorities at least articulated and listened to. And we've lost that. So there's a lot of frustration with that. And now another change that I think is kind of undeniable is that the demographics in the country are changing. And all you have to do is look around, and the faces are changing. And you can't deny it, and you recognize it. So if you feel that your relative status is getting worse, human nature says, I got to blame somebody for it. And, what has changed? Here's something really easy to see. It's even easier to figure out than the union characterization, which you got to think about. It's just that, look, it's looking different. People are asking for different things. Oh my God, that's why I'm losing things, because these other people are taking it away from me. And I think that there's this undercurrent and that's what some Republicans are preaching, that the changing face of America is what's costing the status quo, taking the life away that your parents and grandparents had. And where you should focus your angst and your anger and your efforts is against those changing demographics, which is incredibly unproductive. And it's really tragic.
And misplaced as well, but here we are.
Yeah, well, I had a summer job in the summer of 1980 at JP Morgan in New York, the big bank, because I was thinking about being a banker. And I can remember one of the vice presidents, who was a white guy there, saying that things are going to get tougher now because there's more competition from women and minorities coming into the field. In other words, it was a reserved place. And then all of a sudden now you got these other people that are in there. And he said it like, we're talking around the table having lunch kind of thing. It wasn't like he was trying to hide it, right? So I second David's point. One of the ironies I want to say, and to Sandra and to David, is just that today is a really interesting day for this conversation, because I learned two things. First, there was that Henry Gates show about your ancestors, and they had on Clint Black, who was the most quintessentially Texas
Yes.
country singer. And it had Roseanne Cash, who is the daughter of royalty, Johnny Cash and his wife, right? And lo and behold, it turned out that both on her dad's side and on her mother's side, they have Black ancestors. And Clint Black, for his family, there were a lot of slave owners back in the day, you know, but guess what? He had Black ancestors too, right? You know what I mean? And it was like these quintessentially quote unquote white people, you know, like that, under the one drop rule, they'd all be members of the Black tribe. Isn't that funny? Isn't it funny? I mean, when you hear it today, because if you remember Johnny Cash went through a whole thing at one point in time with his first wife, where they were saying she was a negress, and he had to say, no, she's white. Okay.
Right.
Back in the day, it was a whole thing in the paper. It turns out that both she was and he was too, had a little bit of that Black blood in there too. So, you know, it's crazy. Okay. So that's the first story. The second story, and I tell you, I learned this today. All right. I'm going to the 50th reunion of a school I went to in DC, which is very snooty. It's called Sidwell Friends. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
That's where, you know, that's where the power people have been going since 1881. You know, Malia and her sister went there and all that, right? So from the discussions with people and all that, it turned out that a Black person couldn't get in there before 1954. Then when Brown came along, they had a vote of the Board of Trustees in 1955. It was a secret vote, and there was one vote in favor or over majority to go and integrate, okay? But the way they wanted to integrate, you're gonna love this one, all right, was that they were only gonna start integration from kindergarten. So if you had a kid you wanted to enter in first grade, they said, no, we're only integrating from kindergarten. You know, the go slow. Remember that? Massive resistance and go slow, because DC's in the South. So there's a guy, 1956, named Jeffrey Mazik. He was number one. And then there was a guy named Gil Queen, who's an old friend of mine I knew. He was 1957, number two. Then there's nobody in 1958. And then in 1959, there's a guy named Charlie Bland came in, and they had like this thing. I'm talking about transition kindergarten.
Yeah.
He was number three. Then there was that same year, another guy named Don Russell came in the same transition. He was number four. Then there weren't any more. And then in 1964, my sister came in as number five and the first Black girl. Okay. And then I came in 1965. Wow. Yeah. I came in 1965 in fifth grade, and I was number six. All right. I'm just telling you this because I've been learning this stuff, right? Okay. So here's the twist. I made up some T-shirts saying, you know, first six Sidwell Friends, lower school, middle school, African Americans that I'm getting made so we can wear them to the reunion on May 6th, right? The ones that are going to show up, right? And I was trying to get the school colors right, so I contacted the alumni office. This is a great story. I hope you bear with me, man. I contacted the alumni office, and on a lark, I asked this. This is going back to what your visits down south, Sandra, Judge. It was, since Benjamin Harrison was president from 1889 to 1893, Sidwell Friends started in 1881. And I wondered if Benjamin Harrison had any children who went to Sidwell Friends back then. So the lady gave it to the archivist, and lo and behold, the archivist comes up with, I don't know, William Henry Harrison VI, who was there in 1917. All right. So yeah, this is Benjamin Harrison, founder, framer, family, Virginia back to the 1700s and all that. This is that family. You know, William Henry Harrison, ninth president, Benjamin Harrison, the 23rd. All right. William Henry Harrison had a child with a mulatto woman, an enslaved Black woman named Oliver Harrison. Oliver Harrison is my ancestor.
Oh.
the family thing that we went down through in Edenton last summer, Edenton, North Carolina, with the family genealogist, has broken it down. And I've got the names, everybody in between, right? So I'm going to my 50th reunion with the integration that happened after Brown. Can't get myself to start off with is number 6, right? But now I can also think of myself as a legacy. Isn't that great? Think of that. I'm a legacy too, which obviously back in the day.
You're going to put it on the shirt?
Yeah, no, I'm not. The shirt's already being made, but I just put a little sticker on there. But that, back in the day in 1917, when that other descendant was going there, I could have walked up to him and said, brother, but I don't think that would have worked in 1917. You know what I mean?
Probably not. Probably
not. I mean, that's KKK marching down Washington, KKK walking down Constitution Avenue times and all that. But the thing I love about it is that it really blows up all the nonsense in a kind of weird way, doesn't it? I mean, all those people who were so hung up on being white for so long and had to make a vote to integrate in 1955. And lo and behold, here's one of those 6 first Black kids. Turns out he's a legacy. And they didn't even know about it. Isn't that funny?
Actually, it is. It tells a lot about this country's attitude toward race and color and all of that. This whole notion of we don't want to talk about, we don't want you to know about this history. But my God, it's just so.
It's crazy.
It's probably crazy. Not. I mean, if we really think about it, it's probably these divisions mean these racial divisions, color divisions are so artificial. They mean nothing in this country, except that we've given it meaning and used it as a basis to, put down others. Because it's just good, particularly for African Americans, if you really, dig into those times, it's hard to not know that that happened. I mean, just look at the whole colorism.
Right.
Well, doing the kind of inquiry Ben's talking about, probably threatening to some people.
Yeah, absolutely.
They don't want to know that. And
yeah, you don't want to know.
As we think about, the unwillingness to accept diversity, what's frustrating about it is that, it's a global economy, and all we're doing is that we're ignoring some assets that we have that we could make ourselves more competitive globally. It's going to hurt all of us. And to me, that's particularly frustrating. It's we've got talent that we're not tapping, and that hurts all of us.
Yeah. Yep. And they in this Henry Gates thing I think it was on Johnny Cash's thing or something. There, he's got the census, right? And the moment in time when the white supremacist racism was the worst, the KKK, 1920s, all that period, the kids that were born there all of a sudden were made white. You know what I mean? In the census.
Yeah, things have changed.
Because, because they didn't, because that's what you would do, But so I sent this out to the entire group of reunion people today. Just say, check this out. I said, please proceed to get your mind blown, right? And one of my friends said, so you mean to tell me you one of those legacies that everybody's complaining about now? there's so much invested in being white, right? I mean, there was the whole thing about how the Irish became white, that whole thing in the late 19th century that, there was this whole effort for, the whole ethnic thing that happened with white people. They said that in World War II, serving to take ethnic groups and, everybody became white. When before that, like you were a Southern European or you go Italian.
Or Italian.
All that stuff,
definitely Italian.
But I just think it's all kind of, I find it all really kind of fun in a way that I can't explain to anybody except to find it all kind of hilarious. The mind games people have been playing on themselves for so long, Like here's another one, Native American. All right. So my great my great grandmother was a full-blooded Cherokee, all right? But under the blood quantum rules and the one drop rule, I wouldn't be a member of the Cherokee tribe, but I would be black. You see what I'm saying? I mean, I love it. I love it.
It's nice that you can take the perspective that it's fun, because I know at some level it's not fun, that it's really hurtful.
Well, yeah, it is, but it's kind of like, I mean, I'm here today, brother, right? I mean, you're here today, she's here today, we're all here today, right? And I just find all these things enrich me in a way that I can't explain to anybody. I know all the pain, brother. I don't forget the pain. I went to Edenton. I saw what those folks had to deal with. I'm not denying the pain, but there's a kind of exhilaration from the pieces coming together. It's like a puzzle that you didn't even know there were pieces to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's kind of cool. That's kind of fun. And plus I got a Jewish thing going on too in here too. So that's another thing,
Hey, Bill, so, what are you then?
I don't know, man.
Then now I finally understand what you're doing in retirement.
Yeah, no, but because
oh my goodness, that's amazing.
You guys have heard of the Rainbow Connection, right? Well, Ben is a kaleidoscopic connection.
I mean, it's just like all these crazy pieces that they're Portuguese Jews who went to Brazil and to avoid the Inquisition, and then they left Brazil and went to the Caribbean, and they went to Jamaica, which was the largest synagogue in the Caribbean, was there, right?
Yeah.
And those folks ended up in Cuba, and then from Cuba they came in at Ellis Island. There were black people in here too. These were the Sephardic Jews, the Sephardic Jews of that period. And I was talking to one of my colleagues at Toledo, like when I was 55, and he said, under any tradition of a Jewish tradition, I'm a Jew. I was like, oh, really? At 55, I find out I'm a Jew, And then he goes on. So recently I said, hey, let me check about getting bar mitzvahed as an adult, right? I'm raised Episcopalian. So I go and contact a synagogue here and talk to the rabbi, and I'm reading online. I got to study for a year. Remember confirmation and all that, having to study all that stuff. I'm like, oh no, man, I'm not going to do a year learning Hebrew and all this stuff, right? Anyway, I called the rabbi to find out what you got to do, right? She says to me, well, actually, you are bar mitzvah. I was like, what? Here I am, 67 years old, and I am bar mitzvah already, man. I was like,
you're not going to have a party.
Mazel tov.
You're not going to have a party. We can't come to your bar mitzvah.
You know what? Yeah. So,
God, that just kind of tells a lot. I'm sure there's probably a lot more people that have the same kind of history that you have, or could pull up backgrounds similar to that. And yet we spend all this time, setting up policies. I mean, you look at what's happening in, Florida and other places. Setting up these policies that focus on, maintaining and reiterating these divisions, when in essence, they're becoming more and more artificial the more as we age. I mean, this
right.
It's just happening. I mean, in my own family, I'm looking at, we've got all kinds of folks in there, and you go, what is this young person? How are they going to identify themselves? Because they've got black, they've got white, they've got Mexican, they've got all these other things mixed in. And so what are you?
Right.
You're a human being. Hello, how about that?
Well, it's kind of this that melting pot idea that we're gonna melt everybody and make them homogenous, which is really ridiculous. It's just unrealistic, and it's really counterproductive. The idea that we're gonna take away any kind of differences that actually might be quite beneficial. So that's that idea that everybody's got to be the same. My grandfather's family immigrated from Austria in the early part of the 1900s, and their name was Wilhelm, and they went through Ellis Island, and they just said, "That's not going to work. you're Williams." So my mom grew up as Mary Jane Williams. Because they couldn't have that name, that German.
The Kaiser Wilhelm thing could not work, man.
Right.
Wow. Yeah. There's so much. It's it's just so artificial. And if we just, and again, back to my optimism about the future and the young people who are coming up now, what do you call them, the Gen Zs, and what are we going to call the next one, the next generation, the generation AAs or whichever, are going to be so composed of everything. They'll be of everything, and they won't be able to be defined, and they're not going to allow themselves to be defined in those kinds of ways that we have. And so I remain optimistic about that. Yes, you know my feeling about that, but I do. And they're going to vote that way too. They're going to put those policies in place when they are of voting age, and those policies in places in the schools and the institutions that they'll be involved in. You're going to have to listen to them. And
if I could add something else is that, with this 23andMe and these other things that people are doing, these searches on Ancestry.com and all that, what's happening is that there are people who are finding out that they have DNA ties to other people. Like this Roseanne Cash found out that she's actually got a common ancestor with Angela Bassett. Boom. She didn't know that. Right. Wow. There was like a string that was common to some ancestor. They couldn't identify the particular person. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But, you like on my mother's father's side, they were from a Carn plantation. Right. And so somebody on that and part of the family did that old Ancestry.com stuff, and they're reaching out to, we'll call them the white Carns. Right. Now there's a whole issue for the white Carns to deal with this person who said, I got the same DNA as you. You know what I mean? Some are accepting, some are like a little complicated about it, right? Because, that it's a heavy thing for them, right? And these kind of things I think are part of the resistance to owning the history that we see now, because, there's a status that's being lost, right? There's a perception of a status being lost, as opposed to a sense of something becoming even greater. Because at least me personally, what the feeling is, I feel much greater. I mean, even in Egypt, did you see that there's a Netflix that's coming out has a Cleopatra who's kind of mixed race? Oh, they're going crazy in Egypt about how she's not white, I mean, right now in Egypt, they want to bring I'm telling you, man, stuff's going on, man. It's like funny to watch, the trips people lay on them.
I share, Sandra's optimism about, I think that younger people reject some of those traditional line drawing. They don't want to do it. They don't think it makes any sense. So I'm optimistic that we can maybe evolve away from that. But I'm also optimistic that their younger people are going to be engaged on many issues. And one of the reasons being that they feel a necessity to do that. They're living on this planet. And as we're watching the news all the time with all the natural disasters and incredible flooding and horrific events, they're saying that this climate change is real, and for a while. And we'd like to have families, and I don't know if the Earth is going to be here for our kids and our grandkids. So we have a high level of motivation to get involved, not just about climate change, but while we're at it, let's get involved on some of these other issues. So the fact that there's a motivation here for younger people that basically depends on their survival gives me some optimism that they'll be engaged on other issues too.
And we failed them.
I think so. I absolutely agree.
We at our age, we failed them, right? Because over the last 40 years, look at what we could have done on that, right? And whatever the way the game got played, I tell my students, I'm sorry, when we do environmental law, international environmental law, that we failed you, in terms of dealing with it over the last 40 years. But,
and we're out of time for today. But I want to thank you all, Sandra, David, Ben, for reminding us how critically, essentially important true human history is, because at its core, it teaches us, it reminds us, it illumines for us that human history truly is connective, not divisive. And that's the lesson that you've shared with us, and we all need to take away from today. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Come back. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. More deep dives, more difficult conversations to make good trouble. Thank you all. Thank
Uh-huh.
you.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.